Well, there won't be too many technical slides today, so I don't think the talk will be too hard to follow. It's a fascinating time for the solar industry, and it's hard to decide whether to tell you that it's doing great or that it's struggling. It all depends on your perspective. The technologies have competed with each other, and crystalline silicon is doing extraordinarily well. And the other technologies, at least in the marketplace, are taking a beating. Last month I got to find out what it's like to have a contract for stock options that used to be worth $20 million and basically rip it up because the company went bankrupt. And it's been a wild ride. I was with NanoSolar when they had 4 people. They climbed all the way up to 350, built out a huge factory, accomplished all of their technical goals, and still came up short, and they've gone bankrupt. And so it's been fascinating watching that. I never could have predicted that. Basically, a $42 billion investment in China kind of changed everything, and the United States was not willing to make investments on the same scale so that the American companies could remain competitive. And kind of, what does that mean for you? One of the things it means is that the best research is now moving back to academia. For a while, it had shifted to industry. It was hard for a small university research group to compete with a 350-person team at a company like NanoSolar or MiaSole or Solyndra. But now universities are carrying the torch. And about 5 years ago, the government invested a lot in university research. And at first, a lot of the groups really didn't know what they were doing. They just knew solar was hot and they dived in. And now they know what they're doing, and you're seeing a lot of really cool innovation. And so I think the next wave of technology is going to come very soon, and you'll see a little bit of that here. So Dan Arvizo just kind of gave you a good introduction, and I'm glad he had very kind things to say about solar. I of course, really believe in it. And I don't have time to look at the whole energy landscape, but that's kind of what you're doing this week. And for me, it's hard to escape the conclusion that solar has to be a big part of preventing climate change. It's just hard to figure out where else you're going to get huge chunks of clean energy. We're going to need about 30 terawatts. And the sun is constantly giving us 120,000 terawatts. So there's plenty of solar energy. It's just a matter of figuring out how to harvest it economically. Solar is safe. There's no bird kill from like wind turbines. Nuclear is very, very safe, except when it's not. And when it's not safe, it's horrifically unsafe. Solar doesn't have those kinds of problems. Minor environmental impacts at the factory itself, but once they're installed, very, very clean, very quiet. This week you're thinking of all the things you can do, and if you haven't seen the wedge concept yet, I'm sure you will. And I certainly don't claim solar by itself is the whole answer. There are lots of pieces, but using solar instead of burning coal is kind of a no-brainer. It's one of the easier ones. One of the harder ones is figuring out how to power vehicles because the battery technology is not quite there. But at least for electricity in our buildings, solar really makes a lot of sense. And one great thing is that it provides the power when we need it the most during the day. I guess it's bad that solar is intermittent, but it's good that it's providing it during the day when people are using the most power. So these are some of the reasons why I think solar is going to be really important. The Department of Energy has a program called SonShot, and they've got a nice report that you should read if you're interested in solar. And they basically say that if we can get the solar cells installed at $1 per watt, meaning that at noon when the sunshine is at its peak, you'd be getting 1 watt of power out. If you hit that number, that's when you're competitive with electricity from fossil fuel powered plants. And so that's our target. And not too long ago, the number was up at $8 per watt. Now we're below $3 per watt, and we're moving very rapidly towards that target. It's important to break it down a little bit, and half of that would go to the module itself, the actual semiconductor device that absorbs sunlight and generates electricity. About 10% of it would be an inverter that converts DC electricity into AC, and about 40 cents would be allocated to installing it, actually getting people to go out and put it on the roof or put posts into the ground and put up the framing and connect the wires and all of those things. This is a little bit of the story of how the prices for just the modules shot down. And this part down here is the module, and you see it just diving downward. And basically, this is when the major investment was made in China. One company, Suntech, did extremely well, and Zhen Rongxi became the first billionaire in China. And he was like Michael Jordan over there. He was in the newspaper every day. So some of you look like you're from China. Maybe you probably read those newspapers. And everybody wanted to be like Zhen Rongxi. And every province in China wanted to have a company that was making billions of dollars. And I wouldn't say that China, the federal government, said, let's invest $42 billion and blow the United States away. It was more the provinces competing with each other, and before you knew it, you had 5 or 6 heavyweights that each got about $6 or $7 billion investment, and they built huge factories, and the prices soared down and really allowed the industry to take off. Back here, you see most of the cost was in the module, and that led us to really focus on making the device cheaper. Now, about half of the cost is in the installation. And so you really have to get serious about reducing the installation cost. Some of that you still do with the device. If you raise the efficiency, then you don't have to put in as many panels. And so we're working hard on raising the efficiency. And if you can reduce the weight and make the cells flexible, you can even imagine just rolling them out, and that would cut down installation cost. Or you can integrate them right into a building. And you could say, if the roofing material has solar cells built right into it, you might argue that the installation costs don't really count because you needed a roof anyway, and you were already going to pay to put people up there to install it, and now maybe there's just a little bit extra because there's some wires in there, and you have a solar roof. But the other thing that's happening, it's a little outside of my realm, but the installers are just getting better at it. And the installers in Germany can do the job at a much lower cost than in the United States, because they just have so much practice over there. And then we just unfortunately have a lot of permitting problems in this country. A lot of the cost goes into the permit. And I think we need to move from really small installations on people's houses to bigger ones that are cheaper. And then there an idea from the SonShot program that I really like. They like to point out, when you buy a TV, you don't have to call an electrical contractor to come out and install your TV for you and approve of the project. You just plug it in and it works. It would be great if you could just plug solar in, but right now you connect it into the grid, and they have to be really careful about that and make sure it's not going to cause a fire or anything. But maybe someday it will be cheaper. So one of the things I hope you're seeing here, there's opportunities here for material scientists, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, and then later also we really need work in policy and economics and educating people about what solar can do. Dan Arvizu just showed you this, which is no surprise because I got it from the National Renewable Energy Lab. This is the installations versus year, and these are some phenomenal years here where that was more than a doubling in that particular year. Although just this this last year we've had a little bit of stagnation. The growth has slowed down. A lot of that is economic problems in Europe, and we're seeing the impacts of natural gas. That's been one of the biggest shockers over the last few years, and I personally think we're making a huge mistake in shifting too much of our emphasis on reducing greenhouse gases with natural gas, which is only cutting it in half, and instead of other things that cut the emissions almost completely. But I do think we're going to see growth, and I actually think that this is underestimated because in my travels I find that there are some really exciting projects in the pipeline. China, right now they're just building panels, and a lot of them are being stored in warehouses because they grew so fast that there's now an oversupply. Well, they're going to install them in China. I mean, they're not just going to leave them in the warehouses. So I think you're going to see massive installations in China. And here's a report where they're going from 7.5 gigawatts to 35 gigawatts over the next few years. I go to Saudi Arabia at least once every year. I'm headed there in a couple of months. And they are very, very excited about solar. And they're going to go from 1 gigawatt up to 16 and then to 25 gigawatts. And the king has allocated $100 billion for research in solar and for these projects. And I'm helping them build up a solar research center over there right now. And Japan is moving heavily into solar after the nuclear disaster, and the United States is also. Those are the four big countries that are really ramping up in solar. So I think the industry is going to do incredibly well. Some people might say silicon has won and it's all over, but let's just run through some very rough calculations. We're trying to someday get to 30 terawatts. And we could have a long debate about this, but let's just say solar gets 20%. Some will say I'm being way too optimistic. Some might say I'm being too conservative. Let's just say 20%. Now, we have to be careful with our units. When people use that number, they mean averaged over the entire day. When I say a solar panel is at 100 watts, I mean at noon. So we would need 5 watts at noon, it turns out, to average 1 watt throughout the day. So we would need 30 terawatts of PV capacity to do 20% of the world's power. And they last about 30 years, and that means you would need to install a terawatt every year so that you had 30 terawatts of capacity out there. So that's how big I think the industry might be. Right now we're at about 0.027 terawatts. So I think the industry has enormous room to grow. And right now investors seem a little reluctant to push for new things that could be a little bit better. But at $1 per watt, this is $1 trillion per year market. And I think investors will eventually come around and realize that it makes sense to develop even better technologies than what we have now. This is a snapshot of where the industry is right now. Silicon is about 90% of the market, and that number, depending on who you ask, about $0.6 to $0.8 per watt. So it's getting close to the 50 cent per watt target of what we want, but that's not the whole story. we feel like we need to get the efficiency up close to 25% so that the number of panels that needs to be installed will go down, and then the installation costs will go down as well. And so I would argue that we really do still have quite a ways to go to build what we need. These are the thin film technologies, cadmium telluride and copper indium gallium selenide. They, in principle, should be cheaper because you just have a little bit of semiconductor on a cheap glass substrate, but their efficiencies are a little bit lower, and that has been their problem. And the companies were not able to get those efficiencies up fast enough, and almost all of the SIGS companies have gone out of business this year. But First Solar is still hanging in pretty well with cadmium telluride. So I think there are about 4 paths where things could go. One is silicon could just get better and better and better. Its world record efficiency is 25%, but it is a little bit hard for me to believe that they will manufacture in high volume at that number. If you take my solar class, you'll see all the fancy things that had to be done to get 25%, and you'll see why the factories put out 16%, which is a lot lower than the world record. I think it's going to be hard to average that number, so I think that's going to be the leader for a while, but I don't think it's going to be the winner 10 to 15 years from now. I think another trajectory is we'll build tandems. We'll put another solar cell on top of a silicon or a SIG solar cell, and what will happen is the top cell will absorb the part of the solar spectrum where the photons have a lot of energy, and that cell will generate a higher voltage. You'll get 1.2 volts out of that cell instead of 0.6. And then the low energy photons will go right through and be absorbed in the lower cell. And it turns out you can get more efficiency if you do that. And so what I think will happen is we'll figure out how to very inexpensively put down these higher energy gap cells on there. And this is what we work on in my group. And the beauty of this is that you're not actually replacing the silicon industry. You wouldn't be proposing to shut down all of those factories. You would just be proposing to add a few new tools to it and put some additional layers. And so if silicon gets better and better over the next 5 to 10 years, that does not make this approach obsolete. There's been a huge advance this year. I was telling you 5 years ago, lots of new researchers came in. They searched for new materials. Finally, in the last year, there's been a huge home run. These are the perovskites. Perovskites have been known for over 100 years. There are lots of different combinations of atoms you can put in here. And who would have thought that methyl ammonium lead iodide would turn out to have great properties for solar cells? But it does. And it just barely worked at first, and then when it hit 8%, it got people's attention, and then all of a sudden it was up to 15%. And it normally takes over 100 people 10 years to figure out how to get 15% with a new material. Just 4 teams got it in and they didn't really start back there. They started right around here, and they got it in just about a year. So there's something special about this material. We don't even know what it is yet, and we just hope that this keeps soaring up here, and that this material might revolutionize the solar industry. We're also seeing like whole new approaches. There's a company called Alta that they grow a very high quality film of gallium arsenide, and they use a single crystal to grow it on, and the problem is that single crystal is too expensive. So what they do is they peel the solar cell off, and then they have a thin, flexible solar cell. It works great. They get 28% efficiency, and then they just reuse the wafer, and they keep growing it. And this is hard and, frankly, a bit overhyped. The founder of the company says that it's basically so cheap you could consider it to be free. That's like saying Ferraris are basically so cheap that you could consider them to be free. This is still the most expensive way out there to make a solar cell. But it's an example of something that maybe with a lot of work we could figure out how to do this and have flexible 28% efficient solar cells at low cost. Just briefly, I'll say for the policy people here, I'm sure there's some business school people in the room. We really need to figure out how to continue to support the R&D. The venture capital community, they overact to everything. They invested in solar companies that had no clue what they were doing back in 2005, and now they won't invest in companies that have beautiful ideas. And it's great that at least we have R&D here in the universities. Permitting, we need easier permitting. We need a smarter electricity grid so that we can handle power from an intermittent source. I think the huge one, we need a revenue-neutral carbon tax, and George Shultz is a real big proponent of that, and hopefully we'll get that someday. These are the courses you can take to learn more in solar at Stanford. Bruce Clemens teaches one that's solar cells, fuel cells, and batteries. It's for undergraduates and masters and people who they want to understand these technologies but not a super deep dive. My course is more for people who really want to learn a lot about solar cells. That's geared for the masters and the PhD students. And we both take a deep look at the technology, but I also tell a lot of stories about the industry and all these companies that I've known and advised. And I've been fortunate to talk to the CEOs of all the big companies in China and tell you a lot about what I've learned from that. There's a full list of everyone who works on solar on my website, so if you just go there, if you're looking for a group to do research with, you can find the names there. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
So we talked about how we reduce the cost, the installation costs, and you touched on also some of the technologies that are being developed to reduce the module cost. So what are the other technologies or researches that are being done to reduce the inverter cost and module costs?
Inverters, I don't know a whole lot about. It tends to be done mostly by big companies like General Electric, and they're pretty quiet about what they do. One thing, I gave this lecture a year ago, and I'm really excited about the impact it had. 2 sophomores said, "Okay, we got to figure out a way to work on this." And they started up a company, and they just landed a huge grant, and I'm not sure they're coming back to school this fall. I think it's going to work. They have figured out how to get more power out of a system. I can't really say what it is that they're doing, but one of the reasons I said that is just to encourage people to look for those niches where maybe there isn't as much activity, and where you can find ways to make a difference there. And the module design, again, you don't see it as much at the university, but companies like DuPont they just figure out how to make the glass cheaper, the back sheets, the junction where the wire goes in. No particularly profound idea that you'd look at and say, wow, that's cool. But lots of innovation. The big one will be flexible. If we can come up with a material that keeps the air and water out and is cheap and flexible, then you'll have the rollout modules.
Yeah, so if today you wanted to buy a bunch of panels, where would you go? Who would you talk to? Which country would sell it to you? Who's cheaper, the better quality today? If you had to say.
Oh, I can get in trouble when I answer that question. I'm going to go with SunPower cells, not because they were invented at Stanford and I really like Dick Swanson, who founded the company, but they're the most efficient. They're at 21%. They are a little bit more expensive. There are real concerns that, I mean, the competition right now in China, it is unbelievable. You know, Suntech is in bankruptcy. The other companies are barely surviving. It's really weird that they on the one hand, they're doing great, and on the other hand, they have beaten each other up. And because they're struggling to survive, they're very tempted to use lower quality components and materials. And now we're starting to see the modules failing out in the field. And you know, they really need to last 25 years for you to get your money back. So I personally, I'd be more comfortable with the SunPower cells because I think there's a very high level of quality control there.
What do you see long term as the, I guess, interaction or the split between the PV and the concentrated solar? Do you see concentrated solar?
And by that you mean heating a liquid and then, right. Yeah. Well, if I give an advantage of the concentrated solar, you can heat a liquid and sometimes store it and then generate electricity at night. That's nice. You have a turbine, and you can also run it off of natural gas. So you have the turbine, it's connected to the grid, and you got all of that. It's kind of nice that you can switch between running that system off of the sun and running it off of natural gas. I think the reason solar has done better partly is because there are a lot of semiconductor fanatics in Silicon Valley who really like making solar cells, and we've worked hard and we've pushed things forward. But it's easy to scale. It turns out when you need to solve a problem, if you can solve it piece by piece, you make better progress than if you need to do one huge plant. And with a huge plant, you got to raise a lot of money, and you got to get a big permit, and the local community might battle it and say, we don't want that here. Whereas PV, they just one rooftop at a time, one little system at a time, and then it just adds and adds and adds and adds. And that's why I think photovoltaic has surged ahead. And as far as who will be cheapest in the long run, yeah, a little bit hard to forecast. It's kind of neck and neck.
In the cost breakdown that you give, there's a module price, installation price, and an inverter price. But shouldn't there also be some reflection of an increased distribution costs into the system? The reason why I'm saying this especially is in Belgium you have this policy where a lot of people would put a solar PV panel on their roof, and everybody was so happy because we were going green. But over the last 10 years, we saw distribution cost, which was approximately a third of our cost, almost double. So energy prices in Belgium have skyrocketed mainly due to PV. And that cost is nowhere reflected in any model that I see. Whereas it is associated with having a more distributed power supply.
Yeah, you know, I'm not going to be able to give you a satisfying answer in under a minute, but what I will tell you is that Stefan Reichelstein in the business school is working hard on that, and he and I have talked a bit about the subject. There are, like, if you want to ask the question, what does solar have to cost to compete with conventional sources, I get forced to give you one number in a short talk like this. But there are many factors. You know, the price of electricity varies during the day. It varies during the location. The amount that you're willing to pay for energy depends on, yeah, how reliable is it? Do you get it whenever you want it, or do you get it only when it comes? And then, like, if solar is giving you this electricity and you're saying, oh, you have to take it whenever we give it to you, someone is stuck with providing the power when solar can't do it, and you're probably pointing out that that power could be really expensive. Like if there's a natural gas peaker plant sitting there, unused most of the time, and just occasionally you flip it on, well then the cost of that electricity is very expensive. And so to really look at the problem right, yeah, you have to tie all of that in, and then you're looking at a 50-minute presentation. But it sounds like you would like to see that presentation, and Stefan Reichelstein will give it. We're going to have back-to-back talks in the energy seminar in the winter, and I'll cover the technology in more depth than I did today, and he will cover the economics, and we'll be communicating so that our talks go together and hopefully cover all of these things. 0 minutes, I guess that means I'm done.
Thanks very much.